Tonight on CBC Vancouver News. More mudslides and more evacuation alerts as BC braces for more flooding. Plus, the former chief of staff to Vancouver's mayor apologizes after people are moved off East Hastings.
I feel a tremendous amount of remorse for making that comment and having it not be true.
More on the commitment he says he made about housing, and following a mineral from BC to the U.S.
The concern with selenium is that it can lead to deformities in the young fish.
What impact it can have on our wildlife.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening, I'm Dan Burritt. Thanks for joining us. Anita is on assignment tonight. Communities in BC's southern interior are bracing for more potential flooding as Environment Canada warns of severe thunderstorms and heavy rain into tomorrow. That warning is in effect for much of the Okanagan and Kootenay Lake. The River Forecast Centre has issued a flood warning for the Lower Thompson, Whiteman River and Boundary, with more areas in the interior under flood watch. The Ministry of Emergency Management is warning people living in these areas to be prepared to leave very quickly, something that's already been ordered in the village of Cache Creek, parts of the Okanagan Indian Band and the regional district of Kootenay Boundary. Meanwhile, the entire village of Salmo is now under evacuation alert. This comes after days of warm weather caused the snowpack to melt, and officials warn this may become a pattern.
The weekend looks pretty unsettled throughout the province. We're going to see some scattered showers even on Sunday. Now, what's going to be interesting is that things will progressively get drier and warmer through the week next week. And by next weekend, we could be in for another round of heat.
Environment Canada also warning people to check travel and weather advisories regularly, be very careful near any water, and watch for mud and landslides when driving. Another mudslide, meanwhile, has cut people off from their homes and loved ones in the Okanagan. It happened Wednesday morning near Karamias, creating a major roadblock. Lower Similkameen Indian Band is keeping people and traffic back after this slide covered the roadway and cut off access to 8 homes. They say it's about 100 meters across and several meters thick in some places. Yesterday, the band used a helicopter to bring 4 elders and other people to safety to deliver food and supplies to people still on the other side. The chief says they can't begin to clear the mud away because water is still flowing down a gully. So they're at the mercy of the weather. The band is also dealing with another creek that has spilled its banks and is threatening homes. It could be next week before crews can clear that mud. For more on the weather conditions this evening and into the weekend, meteorologist Johanna Wagstaff is here. Joe, a very tough week for a lot of people. What is next?
Yes, this is exactly the scenario that people were worried about. Isolated thunderstorms and downpours across the interior tonight. Let me take you right to the radar where you can see a swath of moisture moving in across the southeast. This is where we're getting thunderstorms and potentially isolated downpours, particularly in the southern and central Okanagan and the west Kootenays. Meanwhile, there's another pocket of thunderstorms up towards the Prince George region. That's where we're also watching for isolated downpours. So very much touch and go over the next 12 hours, with these thunderstorms expected to continue through the evening hours. We do have watches and warnings in place. So if you do see thunder and lightning, head indoors because some of these storms are pushing severe limits. You can see that cluster around Prince George under the thunderstorm watch, and then the central and southern Okanagan also under that thunderstorm watch. So as far as rainfall totals, what we're really worried about when it comes to escalated flooding and mudslides is anything over 40 millimeters over the next over the next 12 hours, I should really say. And we might just get that with the kinds of thunderstorms that we're watching. Taking you through the forecast, we can see that the rain really concentrates in through the southeast, and that's definitely where the concern is. Rain will continue Saturday, but luckily drying trend starts early next week.
All right. Thanks very much, Joe. Coal mines operated by Teck Resources in BC are releasing selenium into the waters in BC's Elk Valley. Selenium is a natural mineral, but in high concentrations, it can harm aquatic life. As it continues its way to the American border, tensions between Ottawa and Washington are rising. Radio-Canada's Camille Vernet followed the path of selenium from BC to the U.S. to meet the communities that live around those waterways.
This river, to me, is kind of like our lifeline. It is pretty much our pulse. It's our people. It's what it means to me. It's my heart.
Over the years, changes on the Kootenay River has put pressure on the fish population. David Weaselhead Jr. is working to save the river's white sturgeon.
That's why I love my job, I guess. That's why I'm here, to restore the population of the sturgeon, to get it off the endangered species list.
At the hatchery of the Kootenay tribe of Idaho, he will collect eggs from this female caught earlier today in the river. The eggs are then fertilized and the baby fish are cared for. This little sturgeon will soon be released. Burbot populations are also threatened.
They were almost all gone by the 90s. And through the program that you're seeing here, we've been able to actually bump the population back up to about 50,000 adults.
While both species of fish have been suffering for a long time, a newer issue is making things worse: selenium, a natural element, but in high concentration, it can affect the fish's reproduction.
And some of those burbot already exceed protective criteria here in the United States, which means these young females, their eggs have a higher selenium concentration than the science has shown would be safe for them.
The worry is if the trend isn't reversed, there will be catastrophic decline in fish stocks. To find the source of that selenium, we have to follow the river, north across the Canadian border and into the Elk Valley. It's here that Teck Resources has been mining coal, which is an essential fuel to make steel.
So behind us here are the waste rock piles where the selenium actually is released from. Oxygen and water from rain and so forth will enter those piles. That'll lead to selenium being released into that water and then traveling through the waste rock piles and into the rivers and downstream.
Teck says it has spent $1.2 billion to put a stop to this release, but levels are still high.
Although you can treat water for 10, 20, 30 years as these mines are operational, you have to think of it in a larger scale, which is hundreds of thousands of years.
Scientists are monitoring those levels across the border, near the Libby Dam, in the water, fish, and even in insects. A small amount of selenium in the water can end up in a large amount in fish as it accumulates through the food web.
The concern with selenium is that it can lead to deformities in the young fish.
Government agencies on the U.S. side have been collecting data since 2020.
Oh, yeah, nice. The concentrations in the eggs of some of the species of fish do exceed the regulatory concentrations of concern.
Over the years, the Canadian provincial and federal government has fined Teck millions of dollars for polluting the river.
Up till now that the company has been out of compliance and there seems to be little or no consequences, and that's concerning to us.
The provincial Ministry of Environment says it is working on a permit change to the mining operation to limit the waste discharge. The vice chairman of the Kootenay tribe of Idaho is in Washington, D.C. to help inform officials from Canada and the U.S. as they work towards an agreement to reduce the water pollution in the Kootenay River Basin.
So we need to figure out a good way to move forward in the future that takes care of things and keeps things clean, keeps our pristine waters.
He says the hatchery and all the restoration work on the river has cost about $500 million.
To put in all this work and to feel like we're reaching, some success and getting somewhere with it and feeling pretty good about that, and to realize how precarious the situation is, it's disheartening, and it'll never stop my resolve, but it's like a gut punch.
He hopes for better accountability from the mining industry to preserve the work done to protect fish. Camille Vernet, CBC News, near Bonus Ferry in Idaho.
A group of gig workers here in BC is reigniting calls for better safety and workplace conditions after an Uber passenger attacked a driver in Abbotsford in April. His claim for compensation was denied. As Janella Hamilton tells us, some app-based workers say they are ready to go on strike if the province does not improve labor protections, and soon.
I have to do everything by myself.
As the sole caregiver for his aging father, Kaljit Singh needs a job with flexible hours. In 2020, he began working as an Uber driver, but he says inflation and the rising cost of living are eating into his earnings.
If you deduct all the depreciations, all the gas expenses, all the repairs, my income was like only $33,000.
Singh says as an independent contractor, he has no minimum wage, job security, overtime, nor vacation pay, protections most workers have under the Employment Standards Act.
If I deduct gas, taxes, everything, he was on $3 to $4 per hour. That's what we are getting.
He says most ride-hail and food delivery companies take about half of every fare.
Uber drivers, Lyft driver, they're humans. We are not machines.
That's not an acceptable standard of work for anybody in this province, and it shouldn't be for these folks, mostly, newer people to our country.
Indiraj Gill says many workers feel they have no voice, and when they do report concerns, numerous drivers say the companies usually penalize them by freezing their accounts.
That is a punch to the gut for somebody who's maybe reliant on the work.
Uber says when a driver or passenger reports a problem, it tries to conduct what it calls a thorough investigation. That may include temporarily placing a driver's account on hold. So many stay quiet.
It's a system which discourages you to be safe, basically.
These drivers are calling on the BC government to change legislation that automatically covers them under workers' compensation, allows them to unionize, and have pay transparency. Skidmore says more women drivers are now delivering food instead of picking up passengers because they feel unsafe.
One of my colleagues was having a chat with a worker the other day, and she was driving her Uber with her grandma to add an extra layer of safety. That shouldn't need to happen.
Singh says if the government does not step up soon, he and other drivers are prepared to strike. Janella Hamilton, CBC News, Surrey.
It has been 1 month since the City of Vancouver started formally removing tents on East Hastings Street. Yesterday, we introduced you to some of the people who were forced to leave their makeshift homes. A decision some say was more harmful than helpful. In part 2 of our series tonight, Arlene Young takes us to City Hall to find out what led to those actions and why the mayor's former chief of staff is now apologizing.
We got this interesting tip, shout out to Justin McElroy, our colleague, that there was this meeting that was held October of last year and just before council was sworn in. And in this meeting, the ABC party vowed they would not displace downtown Eastside residents without adequate housing. And this was not said by the mayor. He wasn't in the room at the time, but by his former chief of staff. And we are going to go talk to him. Kareem, first of all, I wanted to ask you about that meeting. What was the promise or the vow that was made about the downtown Eastside encampments in that meeting?
I committed that we would not decamp Hastings without the appropriate housing being committed. We knew at that point that 100 to 120 modular units on Hastings and in the Athletes Village were coming online, so we were quite comfortable making that commitment at that point.
So why are you choosing to speak out now? Because you left the mayor's office about 2 months prior to all of this, right?
Yeah, I made the comments, and I think I owe the community an apology, and I'm also here just to also ask for forgiveness for misleading everyone in that way. So I feel a tremendous amount of remorse for making that comment and having it not be true, and that's why I'm here today, just to apologize.
This is really eating at you, hey?
Yeah, no, I'm quite disheartened, and I think a lot of people in the community spent a lot of time educating me and teaching me about what was going on, what was happening, and I felt a sense of obligation that that on the day of the decampment, that the words that I said to them turned out to not be true, and yeah, it was pretty gutting. It was pretty gutting for me. You don't often go into a room like that and make the kind of commitments that you have and then have them, turn out to not be true.
We are just waiting for the mayor, and is that him? No, that's not him. Waiting for the mayor to have a chat.
I think he's on his way now.
Oh, Oh, there he is. So we've spoken to a number of stakeholders from the downtown east side, and there was a meeting just before you were sworn in with a group called the CCRN, so around 30 to 40 stakeholders. You weren't there that night, but your then Chief of Staff, Kareem Alam, was there, and he vowed on behalf of ABC that you would not be removing those tents until there was sufficient housing for everyone. What changed?
Well, first of all, there was sufficient housing for everyone. So, like I said, leading up to the event, everyone was offered housing, and I forget that actual.
Really, because the shelter said that they were full. All the shelters said that they were very full. UGM says they've been full for 15 months leading up to it.
So there was enough shelter space in the system. Sometimes it wasn't right there, but every single person who put their hand up was offered and received shelters.
You know, a lot of people have come out strongly against it. So we heard from the BC Federation of Labor. They represent 500,000 members. They called it the actions callous and dehumanizing, including among them CUPE. We had 700 academics from across the country, most of them from BC, all decrying that, saying that, this is against public health best practices. Federal Housing Advocate called for a moratorium on the actions. We saw the BC Human Rights Commissioner also flag it being a problem. Then multiple frontline stakeholders on the downtown east side, nonprofits, some of them the Aboriginal organization, the Battered Women's Society, all saying that this should not have happened the way it did. Why did you feel like it had to?
Well, we've spoken to multiple individuals, people, residents of Vancouver, people that are living in the downtown east side, our engineering crews, the Vancouver Fire and Rescue, the police department, and just regular citizens. And the overwhelming response has been incredibly positive. And so I think individuals that are commenting should spend a lot of time in the downtown east side.
But these are people in the downside. They're social workers.
Sure.
They're people frontline workers.
And a lot of the frontline workers that we speak to actually do support it as well. And so the reality is, look, we were enforcing a fire bylaw. My question to everyone who has these comments, look, we welcome them. Here's the reality. What would they do in the situation that we had? We had a significant public safety risk. What happens if one of those 100-pound tanks go off and it takes out an entire structure or an entire city block where hundreds of people die? What would they say then? Like, we're not working in a perfect theoretical situation. We did have housing options available. We do have, we're providing as much support services as possible. We have to look at it holistically and do what's good for the whole. And that's what we did that day.
So, Michelle, the first day of the formal tent removal, April 5th, your office is right down here. Yep. What went through your head as you watched the community youth service face that?
It was really scary, sad, and not the way things should be done. I would say the messaging had been from council, we want to do things that are community-based, community-led solutions. Community has the expertise, the knowledge, etc., so let's work together. And then when the encampment happened, de-encampment happened without the forewarning, without the collaboration, so nobody could prepare for it properly and do things. It was opposite of what they had led us to believe, the way they were going to work, and that was disappointing from a relationship perspective and traumatizing from an actual decampment perspective.
The mayor says they had to do this for safety reasons. Talking about the propane tanks that were down here, the crime. What's your response when you hear that?
I think that safety is an issue, especially gender-based violence, but forcibly removing people without giving them the supports and a place to go, it is only, it's not even a Band-Aid. It's just kind of dispersing things. It's not actually solving what the real issues are. So it's not going to change that crime, safety, gender-based violence. It's still happening. It's just not happening in one place.
the mayor says it's ultimately a public safety issue. That's why the city made the decision that it did. And, we're not privy to the up-to-date minute-by-minute information that he was. But what the mayor did say is that he's committed to cleanup for as long as it takes. And, from the many conversations we've had with people down here, some whom you heard from and some who did not want to appear on screen, almost everyone told us that they thought that it caused more harm than good, at least for them. The issue is a layered and complex one, and we'll see what the long-term effects are. But what we do know is that this community is a resilient one, and ultimately people are going to do what they need to do to survive.
Today is the National Day of Awareness for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit people. Many are remembering those they've lost and pushing for more to be done to prevent discrimination and violence against Indigenous women. The annual event is marked every year by the hanging of red dresses for a lost or stolen Indigenous sister. But it also serves as a day to raise awareness around how police and law enforcement treat missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Today, people gathered at Vancouver City Hall to mark the day where parents of missing women spoke.
I could speak endlessly on the injustices that happened in her case, and I can speak on that with strength, but when I talk about her, I break.
The Union of BC Indian Chiefs is again talking today to call on authorities to end discrimination, sexism, and violence enacted by the multilateral justice systems. The Union of BC Indian Chiefs are highlighting the VPD data that shows Indigenous women were second only to Indigenous girls under 18 to be victims of violence in the city over the last year.
So all of you are witnesses today to hear the stories, feel the anguish, have sympathy and understanding, compassion, as well as raise awareness of Red Dress Days.
Red Dress Day started on May 5th, 2010, a project by Métis artist Jamie Black. But the issues that Red Dress commemorates have long existed. This CBC's Wamish Hamilton reports remembering is just the first step.
The roots of Red Dress Day go back much further than 2010. The year a Métis artist hung hundreds of red dresses around Winnipeg. Compared to then, or even earlier, the names of missing and murdered women and girls are more prominent today. Noelle O'Soup, Tatiana Harrison, Chelsea Poorman. We say their names, we remember them. Sensibilities, if we can call them that, have changed. Because I recall a time when names weren't said aloud. There was a time nobody cared. At least that's how it felt to me. Victims of crime, these women and girls, were also victims of indifference. I remember one such death. I was 11 going on 12. A woman from my community was killed in Vancouver. Her name was Helena George. She was a mother of 6 from the Hoopachuset First Nation. It was 1976. The police and media identified her using a picture from the morgue. Her face, seen like that, on TV. As I recall, that's how her family learned she had died. Indigenous women face life-threatening gender-based violence at such a disproportionate scale, it's hard to fathom. Nearly 1,500 families testified to this during a national inquiry. Their voices got through. What they had to say about their loved ones changed Canada, at least a little. So back to those sensibilities, the ones I see changing. It could be argued that things are not that different. But the fact is, they are. What I see is something I call reflective guilt. It calls on you to do something. It calls on you to feel. It leaves no room for banal disinterest. A bruised photo on the news. Red Dress Day is an important day for all of us to remember, reflect, and care. Every day before and after is the time to look at why we need this day at all. For CBC Vancouver, I'm Wamish Hamilton.
To other news now. Abbotsford police are looking for a group of people recently caught on camera smashing 4 cars in the front of a house. Take a look. It happened just last Saturday night around midnight on Broadway Street near Ridgeway. A group of people are seen on video leaping out of 3 cars. Police say they then used axes, swords, and bats to smash car windows and damage a house.
When they arrived on scene, everyone was gone, but there was significant damage to 4 vehicles in the front of a residence in that 2300 block of Broadway. We didn't have a full picture as to the specifics of what happened until we saw the same footage that we sent out. And that was 12 to 15 people piled into 3 different vehicles that rolled up just after midnight and went to town on 4 different vehicles and this house.
Police are urging anyone who knows about these attacks to contact them. One person has been arrested after a raging house fire in East Vancouver this morning, and police are now recommending arson charges. It happened just before 8 a.m. at a home under construction on Venables near Victoria. As many as 40 firefighters fought to put it out.
Of the houses on each side of the house under construction, which is great. A little bit of smoke damage inside. We did call ESS for one lady in this house right here because she's a little bit elderly and she won't be able to stay in there tonight. So she's going to get accommodations for the next few nights. Unfortunately, the house under construction, significant damage. I'm not sure if we can get rebuilt or not.
And again, Vancouver police are now recommending arson charges. The World Health Organization is declaring an end to COVID as a global emergency. But what does that mean for pandemic management in Canada? We're going to speak to a doctor after the break. And thanks for staying with us on our commercial-free live stream tonight. The World Health Organization announced today that COVID-19 no longer qualifies as a global emergency, marking a symbolic end to the devastating virus and pandemic that triggered once unthinkable lockdowns. Throughout our program tonight, we're going to look back at those early days of the pandemic and how our lives were upended.
Hospitals in China are overwhelmed. New confirmed cases are adding up by the hour. Despite strict containment, the coronavirus has jumped to at least 18 countries, creating the potential for foreign outbreaks.
For all of these reasons, I'm declaring a public health emergency of international concern.
This extraordinary step was taken to better coordinate resources, research, and measures to stop the spread of the virus.
We don't know what sort of damage this virus could do if it were to spread in a country with a weaker health system.
Health officials are already seeing a troubling development in cases outside China. At least 4 cases of person-to-person transmission in Vietnam, Japan, Germany, and now the U.S.
This second case did not travel to China, making this the first person-to-person transmission of the novel coronavirus in the United States.
Countries are being extra cautious, advising against travel to China, even quarantining an entire cruise ship against the advice of the WHO, which seems determined to praise and protect China.
This is the time for facts, not fear. This is the time for science, not rumors.
This infectious disease doctor says the WHO had little choice but to call the emergency despite China's best efforts.
We always recognize outbreaks in hindsight. And so now they're playing catch up and they're being very aggressive trying to control this. So you can actually congratulate China for being really aggressive, but at the same time say it seems to be getting away.
China is putting a brave face on its containment efforts, celebrating the discharge of recovered patients as the number of hospital admissions grows. Vic Adopia, CBC News, Toronto.
The World Health Organization is now declaring an end to COVID-19 as a global emergency. While many countries continue to wind down pandemic measures, as Christine Birak reports, experts warn the disease that has killed millions across the globe remains a concern.
This is a historic moment.
It's therefore with great hope that I declare COVID-19 over as a global health emergency.
With this symbolic end, the World Health Organization reflected on 3 difficult years. While nearly 7 million deaths were reported, based on extra deaths worldwide, it's estimated the virus killed at least 20 million people. Health systems have been severely disrupted. Add to that serious economic damage, divisive social upheaval, and of course, the virus isn't gone.
The worst thing any country could do now is to use this news as a reason to let down its guard, to dismantle the systems it has built, or to send the message to its people that COVID-19 is nothing to worry about.
The situation in Canada right now is fairly stable, but I would say stable at a level that we would love to see it a lot lower.
The latest Canadian COVID-19 data show the number of hospitalizations has been decreasing this year, but remains stubbornly high. Currently, there are about 3,000 Canadians lying in hospital beds with the disease, and the virus killed 84 Canadians in the 3rd week of April, bringing the country's death toll to just over 52,000.
This is one of the viruses where vaccination plays an incredibly important role.
Doctors warn COVID is much deadlier than the flu. It's currently among the top 3 causes of death in Canada, and yet fewer than 20% of people over 60 have received a vaccine dose in the past few months.
One of my concerns is that in people who don't keep up to date on their vaccines because they perceive this as being over, they're increasing the risk of having long COVID or some of these other long-term health effects.
The World Health Organization says it will act again if a more infectious or deadlier variant emerges, adding surveillance remains key to keeping people safe. Christine Birak, CBC News, Toronto.
Well, COVID no longer qualifies as a global emergency, according to the WHO. It is still top of mind for many people. We asked some Vancouverites what they think about that announcement today.
It does not impact my life. However, when I go to see family and people that may be immune compromised, I take a little bit more care.
Almost all the world, I think, it's have the vaccine.
Well, I personally worked through the COVID in Ireland. I just moved over. I was a customs officer there, and I found now, compared to then, I wouldn't say it's really a crisis anymore. I think people have all vaccinated. They're kind of getting on with it now, so I wouldn't say it's really a crisis anymore.
It's interesting. I guess we have all these scientists working for the WHO, so they should know what they're talking about. I guess maybe they've got a handle on it now.
For more on what this means for COVID-19 here in Canada and BC, we're joined by Dr. Brian Conway. He's the medical director of the Vancouver Infectious Diseases Centre. Dr. Conway, thanks for joining us. First of all, what went through your mind when you heard the WHO say COVID is no longer considered a global emergency today?
Well, I think this is a natural evolution of the pandemic. It means that all of the measures that were in place are no longer needed, but we still live in a world of COVID.
The WHO also noted, as you've intimated there, that COVID-19 is not over as a global health threat. If that's the case, what do you think the reasoning is behind this declaration?
Well, I think that emergencies are there for a reason. At the time that it was declared, it was to empower countries, jurisdictions, cities to put in place significant public health measures that were required at that stage of the pandemic. Removing that emergency declaration is suggesting that these are no longer needed by and large, but we still need to pay attention to COVID.
Speaking of which, what are cases like here in BC right now as far as you've seen the data?
Wastewater testing done a couple of weeks ago suggested that as many as 2% of British Columbians were infected at any one time. Because of vaccine hybrid immunity and less virulent strains, disease is less severe, but it is still very prevalent.
How do you think the province then ought to respond here in BC to make sure we don't experience surges in cases? And we have seen that, for example, when Omicron flared up recently.
We need to remind ourselves that vaccination is important. If you aren't up to date, please take advantage of the many places that you can go to get vaccinated. If you're sick, stay home. Have a mask on your person. when it is necessary to put it on. Keep washing your hands and just be aware that COVID is still out there.
On perhaps a psychological or mental level, what about the fact that we heard from the WHO saying the worst thing any country can do is use this news to lower its guard, dismantle its protections, and tell people it's no longer a problem? Is that not an issue, though, where people are going to think, and we've even heard people say, oh, well, the pandemic is over, when it absolutely is not?
Yeah, this is a great concern. I think the messaging from the WHO taken in its entirety was correct. The emergency is over, the pandemic is not. I think we need to get that message out, British Columbians to Canadians, so we continue to do the very simple things that will allow us to continue to have our normal or near normal life.
Dr. Brian Conway, Medical Director of the Vancouver Infectious Diseases Centre. We appreciate your time and your expertise. Thank you.
Thank you.
Charles III will be crowned king tomorrow, spurring celebration and plenty of criticism. After the break, more on what's happening here in BC and across the pond ahead of the big day.
More scrubbing, disinfecting, and wiping down high-touch areas.
These pit crews will comprise up to 4 cleaners, and they will swarm trains and vehicles using a hospital-grade disinfectant.
All part of TransLink's promise to fight the spread of COVID-19 on public transit as the province reopens and more people head back to work.
As long as you feel safe, right?
It was Cassandra Wong's first time back on the SkyTrain in 3 months.
It was pretty spaced out. I mean, again, first experience, right? So it's going to be interesting to see how everyone's going to do it on rush hour.
Rush hour will be the big challenge. Physical distancing on a crowded train, not exactly easy. But TransLink says it will try to control the number of people rushing to the platforms by slowing down access through fare gates.
Typically, only one fare gate will be set to entrance only. The other fare gates will be exit only. So that will limit the amount of people who will be able to tap through.
And to create more space, TransLink is gradually restoring services on SkyTrains, buses, and the C-Bus. And come June 1st, you'll have to start paying to ride the bus again. By that point, all buses should be fitted with plexiglass barriers. Some already have it.
I'm sure it will help.
Passengers are also asked to do their part to not get on transit if they're sick and to travel during non-peak hours. And they're also asked to wear a mask when getting on the bus or SkyTrain.
I think what we need to realize is that not everybody can safely wear a mask. So we need to be respectful of that as well. But it is a way for us to keep our droplets in, to be respectful of others. And transit is a place where you cannot always maintain that distance.
Some passengers are already masking up, but the real test will come when buses and trains are full and the crowds unavoidable. Tina Lovegreen, CBC News, Vancouver.
BC's Lieutenant Governor Janet Austin hosted a reception for honorary patrons at Government House today ahead of tomorrow's coronation of King Charles III.
Permission to raise the Coronation banner.
Absolutely.
The ceremonies included the raising of the Coronation banner.
It's also an important reminder, I think, of our constitutional monarchy and the fact that our constitutional monarchy really is a stabilizing feature in the governance of our society that connects us outward to the Commonwealth, to a tradition of parliamentary democracy, equality under the law, and the protection of our human rights.
CBC News will broadcast the coronation tomorrow live on TV, radio, and online. That ceremony is one that dates back centuries. Tomorrow, Charles III will be crowned king, the first coronation of a British monarch in 70 years. Briar Stewart takes a closer look at what's been called Coronation Eve.
In the final hours, King Charles greeted some of the many in the waiting crowd.
I've met you before in Canada twice.
My goodness, you're looking very patriotic.
This is the moment Bernadette Christie from Grand Prairie, Alberta, met the king.
I told him I saw him in Kelowna and Edmonton, which is kind of funny because he was with Diana then, but I didn't, so I kept that to myself.
She's no stranger to camping out to catch royal events. This is her 7th trip to London and her 3rd night sleeping along the procession route.
Just happened to be in the right place at the right time. Perfect place to pitch the tent.
Others felt the same when they got a chance to greet Will and Kate.
I'm looking forward to it as well. So.
Pray a bit of sunshine stays out, keep you all dry.
In the sun, part of the procession route looked a little like a big British backyard party. But tents were up and the rain did come. Even that, though, couldn't dampen the spirit.
He's going to make a perfect king. Simple reason is he's been brought up by the royal family, hasn't he? And I was around when he was born.
These horses will be pulling the royal coaches in the processions. But in South London, there's another team and a different set of passengers. Now, this is not a royal ride, but it is a replica of the more than 250-year-old Golden State coach, which will be used in the procession. This one came from the set of the television series Bridgerton, but it's being used as part of the pre-coronation excitement. Queen Elizabeth described the real gold coach as being horribly uncomfortable, but the folks on board this one loved the experience.
Yeah, that's the fun.
Did you like it?
You sang horsey, didn't you?
Was it bumpy?
The bumpy?
Yeah.
No?
But of course, not everyone is thrilled by the spectacle. Back at Buckingham Palace, a few in the crowd came out to spread a different message.
We partly wanted to come down today so people wouldn't get the wrong impression by seeing people camped out and think, oh, everyone in Britain supports us. No, we don't.
Thousands of police officers will be deployed across the city as dignitaries arrive from all over the world, some of whom got a chance to meet the king at a private reception ahead of the historic coronation service tomorrow. Briar Stewart, CBC News, London.
An early start to the Alberta wildfire season has wiped out homes and businesses. Why 13,000 people have had to flee already. That's next.
All restaurants have to close.
A surprise to customers and to restaurant owners. An order for all restaurants and bars in Vancouver to close for the day, not just those in the downtown core.
No one sent anything to us. We weren't aware of it.
Dan Rodriguez was already going to close up. After 26 years, tomorrow was the start of an indefinite hiatus.
Yesterday was still good business, and the day before was a good business, but you're putting everybody in jeopardy.
Vancouver Coastal Health issued the expanded order just before 11 a.m. today. Some quickly got the message, but most didn't. And we're still banking on tonight's St. Paddy's Day celebrations. Exactly what the city was looking to prevent in the age of social distancing. This afternoon, Dr. Bonnie Henry issued another order, forcing bars and nightclubs to close indefinitely. The future of restaurants, though, still in limbo.
Everybody's coming to you asking, are we going to close? When do we close? Or what's happening? Or, nobody really knows. So you don't know if it's going to be tomorrow, going to be today. You're getting updates every hour.
Amber Bruce shut down her popular Chinatown bar earlier this week, concern for employee safety and calls to stay at home. Staff are still being paid, but the sooner the government bites the bullet and shuts everyone down, the better off she thinks we'll all be.
We're basically making the business owners responsible for the health of the community.
Health concerns are primary for both our staff and the public, but economic concerns, we're also very aware of that, and we're trying to balance the two.
As for what lies ahead, whether restaurants and bars could be closed indefinitely in this city, the mayor says he's talking to stakeholders about it and opinions are conflicted. An announcement is expected from the city tomorrow. Leanne Young, CBC News, Vancouver.
It's always been technically illegal to drink alcohol in City of Vancouver parks, but you don't have to look far at pictures of people physically distancing these days in many parks, seeing that they're not exactly following those rules. Parks being the only place for a lot of people to meet with loved ones or friends outdoors these days, especially if they live in a condo. So Vancouver City Councillor Christine Boyle is bringing a motion to next week's council meeting, saying that the city should further explore looking at eliminating this rule, believing it would help a lot of people safely follow health advice these days.
And this is the right moment because our health experts are encouraging us to get outside where the virus has a lower transmission. So for people without private backyard space, this is their chance to get outside, have a picnic, see some friends at a responsible distance, and enjoy a glass of wine or a local beer.
Yeah, don't expect this to be allowed for a while quite yet. The problem is that city parks are overseen by the park board, not council. And there's a second question over whether the city's Vancouver charter even gives the city the power to unilaterally make this change without provincial approval. So something that's going to be talked about a lot in the next few days. But whether this would become legal in time for summer, even with a positive hope, still a lot remains to be seen.
Back to our top story now. A mudslide near Carameas in the BC interior. Our Brady Strachan is there, hearing from those affected.
Band officials are keeping people and traffic back from the mudslide area that's on the other side of a roadblock. Now, the slide is covering the roadway and cutting off access to 8 homes on the other side. The slide happened on Wednesday morning when a massive amount of mud, water, and debris came rushing down a steep gully and onto the roadway. Band officials say the slide covers the road about 100 meters across and is several meters thick in the middle. The slide has cut off Kalika Archukin from her family. She was at work when the mud came down, and now she can't return home. She says it's an unnerving situation.
It sucks because I can't see my nephews or my brother or any of my family that's stuck on the other side. I'm just super glad that everyone's safe and no one got hurt.
On Thursday, the band used a helicopter to bring 4 elders and Archukin's daughter to safety and to deliver food and supplies to people still on the other side. Chief Keith Crow says they can't begin to clear the mud away because water is still flowing down the gully. He says they're at the mercy of the weather.
Rain. Really hoping that we don't get the predicted thunder showers. Mild rain, like it's raining right now. If it stays not too bad, we'll be okay, but we don't want those sudden bursts and downpours that could really affect the creeks.
The band is also dealing with another creek that has spilled its banks and is threatening homes. And with more rain in the forecast, it could be until mid next week before crews can finally start to remove the mud across the roadway here so that people like Archukin and her daughter can finally get home. Brady Strachan, CBC News on the Lower Similkameen Indian Band near Osuyus.
From floods to flames, more than 13,000 people in Alberta have been forced from their homes as spring wildfires approach. 70-plus blazes are burning across that province right now. More now from the CBC's Julia Wong.
Smoke is filling the skies as a wildfire burns near Drayton Valley. You can probably see and hear just how windy and how gusty it is, and that is not helping when it comes to this firefight. Now, we are about 150 kilometers southwest of Edmonton, and right over here, right behind me, this is where the fire is burning. Now, there are some buildings near that, but I do want to point out to you just how close this fire is to this town site. Right over there, that is where Drayton Valley is. That is how close the fire is to the town. Now, Drayton Valley and a nearby county are under a mandatory evacuation order. About 7,000 people were told they had to leave their homes immediately, take with them their essentials, and get out of town. Firefighters, helicopters, and air tankers are trying to get these flames under control. But this fire here is not the only one burning in the province right now. There are dozens in Alberta, and from where we stand right now, in almost every direction that we look, you can see smoke coming from a wildfire. The province has seen record high temperatures this past week, and there are tinder dry conditions, and that is making firefighting very challenging.
There's a huge fire load in the province right now. As you've seen, we have fires on the sort of central portion. We have fires in the north. It's just an indication of the conditions that we're seeing. Temperatures have been 10 to 15 degrees above normal for a little while now. We still don't have green grass and leaves.
Many people in this area are shaken. They are anxious just simply because of the sheer number of fires that we are seeing, the size of the fires that we are seeing, and particularly because the fire season is just getting started. Now, there is hope that things could be getting better. Firefighters are coming to Alberta from Ontario and Quebec. And as for that forecast, well, there is a little bit of rain on the horizon. Julia Wong, CBC News, Drayton Valley, Alberta.
Meanwhile, a wildfire in northwestern Saskatchewan forced more people from their homes in the community of La Loche today. Neighboring Clearwater River Dene Nation issued a mandatory evacuation order late Wednesday. The fire has spanned more than 200 hectares. Time for our full weather forecast with meteorologist Johanna Wagstaff. Joe, we said from floods to wildfires, what are you watching for now?
Unfortunately, conditions are drying out again in the north. We're looking at a relatively cooler period over the next couple of days, but smoky sky bulletins already in place because of those existing wildfires. Let me take you back to the watches and warnings. Everyone under the white in the northeast through the Peace, that is where we are dealing with smoky skies because of existing fire conditions. That's also drifting, as you can see, in through northern Alberta. So a lot going on. We're dealing with those isolated thunderstorms tonight, escalating the flood risk. But at the same time, look at that pocket of heat as we head into the forecast, 28 up towards Fort Smith. And we're seeing those kinds of high 20 temperatures in through the Peace for the next couple of days. You really don't get the cool down that everyone else gets. You can see down towards Prince George in 18, still looking at that risk for thunderstorms tomorrow. But then we head into a warming trend. It's not much of a reprieve for the province over the weekend. And of course, it's a double-edged sword because temperatures and freezing levels come down but then come right back up again as we head into early next week. This is YVR's forecast, but very similar trend for the whole province. Once again, we climb next week, and freezing levels by Monday, Tuesday will be back up around 3,000 meters. So we will be watching for escalated flooding once again in the interior, and these are also the same conditions that will escalate fire behavior. So very much, unfortunately, a worst case scenario as far as weather goes, a very wet weekend, not much of a break from the melt. And then we get into that hot, dry forecast for early next week. Likely in the interior, these temperatures will translate to mid to high 20s. And this high pressure ridge that moves in next week, very similar to what we're just coming out of. And of course, the week ended off with widespread high stream advisories, flood watches, and flood warnings in place. So really crucial to see how much rain we get this weekend across the province. I know we had thunderstorms last night in YVR, and then get ready for another round of hot and dry through next week.
Okay, thanks very much, Joe. Just for kicks, seniors are taking to the pitch, but this is not Fast and Furious. We take a look at walking soccer after this.
I'm right now milling this to our sifted red spring flour.
Milling grain used to be a sideline at this bakery and cafe.
So this is our finished product.
This has become white gold in a nation where flour and yeast are in short supply.
So we started with whole grains before we started milling.
The coffee shop part of this business has been shuttered. But its fresh flour has become an economic savior, selling out every day.
And I think just with the increase of people baking at home, they're seeking out some comfort, and that's coming in the form of bread and cookies and biscuits. And so that has added additional pressure into the flour sales for sure.
Thank you so much.
No worries. Have a good day.
Many are posting their home-baked efforts online, a respite from all the bleak news.
The world feels like it's ending. You go outside and there's like very few people, or like lines, and everyone's spaced apart.
Isolated in his home, Brandon Lee says churning out cookies and cinnamon buns
I'm just mixing through all the wet and dry ingredients.
helps pass the time.
Every time I put something in the oven, it lasts like 2 weeks. I'm not sure if it's going to work out, and when it does, I'm very surprised. I'm surprised again.
Just delicious. One of the judges of the Great Canadian Baking Show, who has struggled with severe anxiety, says making bread is therapeutic.
It does create great memories. That's the way I feel it. It gives you a sense of control of your life, and bread can be quite challenging. And if you overcome that challenge, I think there is a feel-good, attitude. I made it. Look at it.
There's a sense of empowerment with baking and making your own food, especially a staple like bread. To be able to make that at home, it gives people a sense of calm and comfort.
A few simple ingredients, but also a way to adapt, create, and overcome. Greg Rasmussen, CBC News, Vancouver.
For 2 months, these boards secured Kim Barstow's print shop, the plywood covering the windows, keeping her store safe from harm when COVID-19 turned Gastown into a ghost town.
Probably the day I saw this store boarded, and how I think that's when it really hit me.
But what made it even worse was how ugly her boarded up store looked.
When I went, that's got to change. That's not looking good.
Hers was the very first in Vancouver where artists were asked to come and paint the boards.
It just came to me that I thought, well, paint what's in the news.
The first two were portraits of Dr. Bonnie Henry and Dr. Teresa Tam. Within a week, all over Metro Vancouver, neighborhoods were following suit with their own artwork.
Obviously, there's always one trendsetter and everybody else follows, so you definitely got to pay respect where it's due.
But we're in phase 2 now. Stores are reopening and the protective plywood with its comforting artwork is no longer needed. So the plywood portraits from Barstow's store, along with many others from around Vancouver, are being preserved. As they come down, they'll be placed on the chain link fence behind Gastown for all to see.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell. Here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox. The Doxa Documentary Film Festival returns May 4th to 14th. Enjoy thoughtful and engaging documentaries, special presentations, industry events, and more. Get your tickets at doxafestival.ca. And never miss a special programming series, event, or contest. Subscribe to CBC Vancouver's e-newsletter at cbc.ca/Vancouver inbox and keep connected with us.
It's one of the most popular and fastest growing sports in BC, but one game isn't known for its speedy action, and that's the point. Lawrence Watt now on walking soccer, and who's playing it?
Very close game. Soccer. It's usually a game that sees parents watching their kids from the sidelines, but at walking soccer, the tables are turned.
I think it's fantastic to see he still got it, still got the moves.
Down more than up.
Just to see my dad out here breaking a sweat and having fun, it's amazing.
James is taking part in a new pilot program, a modified version of soccer where running is prohibited and where there's a lot less physical contact.
Walking Soccer is a program for adults 55 to 60 plus, and it's a low-key, low-impact way to enjoy soccer in a new environment.
We've been running soccer here on the North Shore for over 35 years now. Inclusion is one of our core values, so we decided that we wanted to welcome our senior community and thought that walking soccer would be a great way to accomplish that.
I'm hoping for a recreational level sport and getting to know the people on the field. A little worried about those 60-year-olds, I should say, who who are going to be a lot faster than me because I'm almost 73.
Try to keep your feet moving a little bit.
The sessions begin with a quick warm-up and skills exercise before the players break off into teams for a game. And even though I'm not 60 yet, anyone need a sub? I still had to give the game a try. Oh my! While some players are here to try something new and have fun, for Brendan, he's thankful his dad can play at all.
Yeah, about 2 years ago, my dad was in the hospital with COVID, and it was not looking good. He was hooked up on oxygen, and so just to be here today, watching him run around and be active and having fun and breaking a sweat, it's really amazing.
I'm the only player on the field today, I think, that ended up with about 11 yellow cards or warnings for running.
That was a lot of fun, a lot of sweat. The North Shore Girls Soccer Club is going to be hosting sessions throughout the spring. All people aged 60 and above are welcome. Lawrence Watt, CBC News, North Vancouver.
Love it. Finally, an art installation in Italy is illuminating ideas, literally. Dozens of light installations are on display in Brixen, Italy. The artists were encouraged to share their thoughts on two themes, peace and the environment. Thank you for being with us tonight on CBC Vancouver News at 6. You can watch this newscast online on CBC Gem and on YouTube, as well as our website, cbc.ca/BC. Michelle Gassoub will have your late local news at 11 o'clock, right after the National. Good night. Stay safe.